Good morning, sir. Howdy, how's that one? Howdy. We're going to be looking at the book of Ruth this morning, and I'm sure that many of us are familiar with the book of Ruth, and it's a classic. It's famous. It's a beautiful story, and I think personally it would make an awesome soap opera. It kind of has that setting and scenarios, which is kind of humorous. And I've titled it Man's Decisions and God's Redemption. And we're going to take a kind of a look at that aspect of decisions and actions and circumstances. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind as we look through this book. And we won't be reading through the whole book. We're going to kind of skip around. And it might be a short one, might not be. But first, anyone know what this is? Yeah. That's a good guess, but... No, that's a spaghetti noodle. Really close up. It's a spaghetti noodle. What about this one? Huh? Carpet? That's a good guess. Cracker? Nope. So that's actually a zoomed in picture of a book. And that's the pages. That's just a very zoomed in, kind of not quite microscopic, but close to it. What about this one? I promise none of these are gross, by the way. So I'm not going to surprise you with anything. Hair? Yeah. Beef jerky? Yeah, it kind of does. So that's actually a apple stem. You know, the little top part of an apple? That's what that is, and zoomed up close. And so we're going to look at this again at the end, but this has everything to do with the book of Ruth. And it won't make sense now, but hang in there. That's my hook. Preachers have to have a hook to get you interested in the sermon, so that's mine. All right, so let's look at Ruth, starting in verse 1 of chapter 1. It says, "In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. And the man of Bethlehem and Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons." All right, so this happened in the days when the judges ruled. Now, that should signify something to us, okay? So this takes place in the time of the judges. So what that means is this is a time period where something is going on. And if you just look at the very last chapter of Judges, it tells us what's going on. It says, "In those days, in the time of the judges, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes." Okay, so the story of Ruth took place during a good time in Israel's history or a bad time? Very bad time, right? It's almost like kind of the flood language where the people's heart was set on evil continually. And so the Israelites, they had just become almost entirely corrupt. Everyone was doing what they thought was right. And so it says that at this time, there was a famine in the land of Israel. Well, it says specifically Bethlehem, which is ironic. There's a famine in Bethlehem because you know what Bethlehem means? House of bread. There's a famine in the house of bread. So that's kind of ironic. That's a little odd. So this Israelite family from Bethlehem, there's a famine, and then they leave, and where they go to is the country of Moab. All right, so there's a lot of weird things just packed into this very first verse. What's significant about a famine for an Israelite? What's significant about Moab for an Israelite? Well, if you go back in Israel's history, at Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, God laid out very specific commandments, and he laid out blessings and cursings for the Israelites. Blessings if they followed in his covenant, and curses if they fell out of his covenant and started pursuing idolatry and different idols and started doing what was right in their own eyes, what's going on in Judges. Everyone's doing what is right in their own eyes. In Deuteronomy 28:22, it says, "The Lord will strike you with wasting diseases and with fever, inflammation, and fiery heat, and with drought, and with blight, and with mildew. They shall pursue you until you perish." So that's just, and there's a lot more details than that. There's a lot of other curses, but it's basically your land, your cows, your peace, your family, all of it's going to be messed up and disoriented and fall into chaos if you don't follow my covenant. And God laid it out very clearly for the Israelites. So it's not a shock that in this time when everyone did what was right in their own eyes, that there was a famine in Israel, right? I mean, that makes sense. Now, what about the Moabites? Well, if you look in the book of Judges, right, so the same time period, it says, "And he said to them, 'Follow after me, for the Lord has given your enemies,'" the who? "The Moabites, into your hand." So they went down after him and seized the fords of the Jordan against the Moabites and did not allow anyone to pass over. And they killed at that time about 10,000 of the Moabites, all strong, able-bodied men. Not a man escaped. All right, so it's relations between the Israelites and the Moabites just going swimmingly. Absolutely not. And the Moabites, they were actually supposed to be driven out of the land when they conquered Canaan's land, but the Israelites failed to do that, right? They failed to conquer and drive out all the foreign nations. And what happened was years, even after the book of Ruth, there's years of fighting with the Moabites and the Israelites. And in fact, when Nebuchadnezzar takes over Jerusalem, it says that the Moabites, it's recorded that they went up against Jerusalem with Nebuchadnezzar. So there's an enemy and a hostility between the Israelites and the Moabites, which is odd because the Israelite men married them, these two Moabite women. Verse 2, it says, the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi. And the names of his two sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there, but Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her two sons. All right, so that's sad. Well, let's keep reading. These took Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. They lived there about 10 years. And both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her two sons and her husband. All right, so again, not a great start to a story. I mean, what a beginning if you're going to record this. Who are these people? You know, it's funny because with almost every other book of the Bible, it's either about a prophet, or it's about a family, or an exceptionally righteous individual, you know, kind of like you think about Abraham when it talks about his story. But this seems to be a random Israelite family who made a decision to leave their homeland during a famine. I mean, there's nothing that really sticks out about this family. There's nothing too exceptional, at least that's recorded. Just seems like an average Israelite family trying to provide for themselves, you know, trying to find a better life. So the story begins with tragedy and death in the setting of an extremely messed up and perverted society. So again, this is a tough start. And then poor Naomi, right? She loses her husband, then she loses two of her children, and she's already trying to get away from this famine. And so it's just like when you try to pursue this better life and then it all just backfires, you can imagine the heartbreak of Naomi, because Naomi was a real person. I mean, you know, lost her spouse, lost her kids, just kind of like all in one fell swoop, and she just felt empty. So how does this broken family respond to the circumstances that they are surrounded in, with the tragedy and with the death and with this messed up society? Well, remember, there's Orpah and then there's Ruth. So Orpah, I think she gets a bad rap. She didn't. I always feel bad when they're like, "Oh, Ruth was so much better." Orpah offered, for the record. All right, she pleaded, you know, let me stay with you. I want to go with you. I want to go with you back to your homeland. And Naomi says, no, you get out of here. You know, go. I'm not going to be able to give you, you know, new husbands. Go back to your father's house. Find yourself rest. Find yourself security, because widows at this time are extremely vulnerable, aren't they? I mean, they don't have a lot of assets. They don't have caretakers. They don't have providers. And there were laws for Israelites of what they were supposed to do in the case that a woman, her spouse, dies. Remember, they're supposed to continue the name, the inheritance, provide. They're supposed to redeem the land, which actually gets to the year of Jubilee, but we won't go into that too much. But it's paired with those commandments. But then you have Ruth, who just clings to Naomi. Right? She's this foreign woman. I want you to think about this from Ruth's perspective for a moment. In their history, nationally, right, there's been a lot of bloodshed between the two nations. And then she's married an Israelite. Her husband dies, you know, her source of comfort, her source of providing. And then she's alone with this other vulnerable person, right? So you have two very vulnerable women, and she decides, I'm not leaving. Despite the tragedy, despite the death, despite the circumstances that are going on, I'm clinging to you. Verse 15, it says, and she said, see, Naomi's responding to her when Ruth pleads to stay with her. It says, see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Now, that's not Yahweh God. She's not, you know, gone back to the culture. Go back to the religion that you grew up in, you know. Don't worry about this anymore. Return after your sister-in-law. But Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. When you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord, now that is Yahweh's name there. So Ruth uses Yahweh's name. May Yahweh do so to me, and more also, if anything, but death parts me from you. So, famous verse. I don't necessarily think that Ruth got the full picture about who Yahweh was, at least at this point. But she clung to someone who did. You catch that? She clung to the covenant person of God, and she decided, no, your God, I'm going to make him my God. Your people, my people. And it was out of, and what we're going to see is this motivation of loyalty and faithfulness to Naomi. That she took it upon herself to take care of and provide for Naomi when she was vulnerable herself. When she was a foreigner, right? This is a stranger. And she is saying, I'm not leaving your side. I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to do what I can. So just amazing. Now, what's Naomi's response? So that was Ruth's response to tragedy and these terror and death. What's Naomi's response to this tragedy and death and loyalty shown by Ruth to her? So the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. They came back home. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the woman said, is this Naomi? She said to them, do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. Now, Mara means bitter. So she's saying, call me bitter. What a nickname. Can you imagine telling your friends at school, like, hey, my new nickname is bitter. Call me bitter because God's been really mean to me lately. I mean, it's kind of odd, but you can certainly sympathize with it, right? I mean, she's left famine. She's lost her husband. She's lost her children. In her eyes, she doesn't have too much to live for now. She's lost everything. That's what she says. I went away full, which is ironic because there was a famine, right? That's what I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Barren, I have nothing. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her. Now, did you catch kind of a humorous bit there? She says, I left full, came back empty. But then it says, she had her daughter-in-law, Ruth, with her. She's not seeing what she does have, is she? She's just seeing it from the perspective of what she lost. And again, I'm not being hypercritical of Naomi. You can sympathize with her plight. But who did Naomi attribute as the source of her hardships and for the tragedy and the death that she had dealt with? Who did she lay it at the feet of, the cause? She said, God. God did this. Now, another peculiar thing about the book of Ruth is not once is God mentioned as doing anything in this book. Now, people talk about God doing things in this book, the people in this story, but nowhere is there a narrative of God appointed this or God did this or God worked this way. That's not revealed. Instead, what's put on the stage, center stage, kind of under the spotlight, is how people acted and what decisions they made in light of their circumstances, which is, again, something to ponder. So she says she left full and came back empty, but she was missing something she did have, which was her daughter-in-law. If you look at chapter 2, verse 1, it says, Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man. So what type of guy is this? He's a worthy man. He's a good guy. It says, of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. I always thought Boaz sounded like an insult, didn't it? Like, you Boaz, but it was awesome. So she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened, just so happened, right? Just so happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, the Lord be with you. And they answered, the Lord bless you. I always got a picture of like a Disney movie in this. Just kind of like walking like, hey, hi guys. And they're like, hey, how you doing? Beautiful morning. He's just very courteous, like kind of upbeat guy is what you catch of. And that's what you're going to see with Boaz continually is he's very kind and gracious in everyone he deals with in this book. It says, then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, whose young woman is this? Saw this lady, or hey, who's this lady? What's her deal? It says, then Boaz said to Ruth, and he fills her in. This is Ruth, the Moabite, who's taking care of her mother-in-law. It says, then Boaz said to Ruth, now listen, my daughter, do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping, and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn. Now, it's kind of sad that he has to mention that because, again, if you look at the book of Judges, it's a time when everyone did what was right in their own eyes, and there was a lot of assault of this nature going on. That's recorded in Judges. And so what you see on Boaz's part is setting up protection, right, to keep her physically safe, but then he provides for a source to relax, a source of food and a source of water. He's like, have my servants, go get you water. So he's taking care on every level. He's providing for and taking care of Ruth. Now again, who is Ruth? She's a foreigner, right? She's not an Israelite. She doesn't know the customs of Israel. She doesn't know the people of Israel. She feels as an outcast. And that's what we see in her response. So Boaz treats her this kindly, and she's shocked. It says, then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to them, why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? That kind of breaks my heart a little bit when I read that story, because Ruth was just, as we're going to see in this book, Boaz is mentioned as being a worthy man, and Ruth is being mentioned as being a worthy woman. So you have a worthy man and a worthy woman. And it's just this beautiful idea. And so she already has this outsider mindset of, I'm an outcast, I'm not going to be accepted. I'm not going to be as welcomed, as if I was born an Israelite. But she didn't have to be in this situation, did she? She'd be a lot more comfortable with her own relatives and with her own people and with her own customs. That's what she grew up with. That's what she was inundated with. But she left that out of loyalty for Naomi. Again, now Boaz, it says, but Boaz answered her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law, since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Now, what's so powerful about that is worthy people recognize worthy actions. He says, this is why I'm doing it, because your actions speak louder than anything else. You've left everything. You've risked it all out of love for your mother-in-law, this Israelite. And he also notices he doesn't give himself the credit for providing for or giving her refuge, does he? Notice that. He says, you've come to take refuge in the Lord, in my God. Even though Boaz is the one who's actually, dropping the grain for her and giving her the water, he recognizes that all of those things are blessings from God. So again, you see even this humility about Boaz. Verse 19 of chapter 2, and her mother-in-law said to her, where did you glean today? Remember, she comes back with a whole bunch of grain and everything else. She's like, how'd you get all this? This is wonderful. She says, and where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you. Apparently, it was so much that even without hearing the news, she knew, all right, someone, did you a favor here, because this amount is not normal. So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, the man's name with whom I work today is Boaz. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Naomi also said to her, this man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers. Now, that word redeem or redeemers, again, it connects back to the year of Jubilee about helping the poor or your brother, or, it even extends to family members passing and continuing on the name. You take on the spouse to, have children with, to redeem the land, to own it, so that way the name isn't blotted out. And so that's kind of the concept of redeemer, and it had grown into a cultural right, as we're going to see. But verse 1, it says, then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, my daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Now, the word rest, you can see it in the Old Law as far as it concerns the same word here. And it actually means, rest in marriage. Because, again, as a woman, the pressure on you was to get married, to have children. And if your husband was dead, that's not good. If you don't have any kids, then you're going to be kind of blotted out and forgotten to the rest of time. And so Naomi's like, all right, you've been taking care of me. I have to make sure that you have rest, that, you're stable, that you are taken care of. Verse 2, it says, is not Boaz our relative with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. All right, so Naomi's going to play matchmaker here. She's like, all right, we got a redeemer. We have an option here. He's a relative of my deceased husband, so we can work with this. And so that idea of wash and anoint yourself, so most people assume that she was actually wearing mourning garb, and so she would probably be signifying to the world that I'm in mourning, right? My husband has passed away. And so what Naomi's saying is like, all right, ditch all that, get pretty, get prettied up, put your perfume on, everything else, and signal that, hey, I'm available now. And that's what Naomi's telling her to do, let him know. And so what happens in this story, I don't know how what your first move on your significant other was, but probably wasn't uncovering their feet while they were asleep, was it? No one? Okay. Well, yeah, that's the big plan. That's the big scheme. So he ate, he drank, he fell asleep, and then Ruth wanders in there, and then she uncovers his feet and then lays down by his feet. So it's kind of odd. I've always wondered why, I don't really know, but I do know that if you uncover someone's feet, that tends to wake them up after a while when their feet get cold, something. Maybe that was going on. I don't know. But it seems to be definitely some sort of a submissive act, just like she bowed down whenever you showed her the kindness. So there's something along those lines going out. So in verse 8, it says, at midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. Fellas, that ever happened to you? Yeah, hopefully not. So, of course, he was startled. He went to bed by himself. All of a sudden, he wakes up. There's some lady laying by my feet. Why are my feet uncovered? He's got a lot of questions here. He said, who are you? And she answered, I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. Does anyone know what's going on here? She's proposing. She's proposing. She made it a thing before it was a thing, right? I've heard of people doing that today, but she made it a thing before it was a thing. And so what really sticks out is, you could almost call it hubris in a sense if you didn't know the character of Ruth. Like, this foreign woman is pretty bold, right? To walk up to this, well-renowned Israelite and be like, hey, marry me, you're my redeemer. That seems a bit presumptuous. But again, whose command is she following? Naomi. Naomi told her to do all of this. Remember, it seems like her priority is, I'm taking care of Naomi. I'm making sure that she's redeemed. I'm making sure that she's taken care of. And so I'm not saying there was no love between them, obviously, but it seems like the priority and whose command she followed was Naomi. And Boaz recognized that. So verse 10, it says, and he said, may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. So Boaz was probably an older guy, still single, probably getting worried, like, I'll never get married. He's a good guy, probably just, maybe he was not that good looking. I don't know, something. But he's like, man, you didn't go for a younger guy, whether rich or poor, it didn't matter. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask, for all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. See, her reputation had preceded her because of her loyalty and faithfulness to one of God's children. So it's fascinating. Verse 12, and know it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. And that's the dun, 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 right? That's like a kind of dramatic suspense, like, what's going to happen next? It was going so well. I thought Boaz would get the girl. What's happening? Verse 16, it says, and when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, how did you fare, my daughter? Then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, these 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said, you must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law. Catch that? Now Boaz is even concerned for Ruth's mother-in-law. So she replied, wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out. This is hilarious. For the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. You got an opportunity to find a beautiful spouse. You're not going to just kind of leave that on the back burner, are you? You're going to make that a priority. So chapter 4, verse 1, it says, now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, turn aside, friend, sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down here. So they sat down. Verse 4, he kind of gives them the lowdown, and I want you to pause for a second. Do you think Boaz probably could have done this under the table without raising any alarm bells around it? I mean, Naomi kind of seemed to, didn't she? She was like, hey, yeah, he's a redeemer. He's close enough. Go for him. But Boaz is very thoughtful, and he's a man of integrity. And that's what I really want to impress upon you. As he sees that, and he's like, honestly, I'd be thrilled to do that. I want to do that. But guess what? I'm going to do the right thing, even if it jeopardizes what I want. You catch that? And not only that, but he's wise because he gathers witnesses. He gathers elders, and the way he speaks to this Redeemer is he says, friend, sit down, let's have a conversation about this. He says, so I thought I would tell you of it and say, but buy it in the presence of those sitting here. He just mentions the land at first. He's like, so he's also kind of cunning in a way. So he's like, there's this land, of one of our fellow kinsmen, and you're closer. Do you want to redeem the land? Do you want to buy it back and, preserve that for our brother? Not actual brother, but relative, for our kinsman. He says, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you. And he said, I will redeem it. Dun, dun, dun. Oh, no. It's getting worse. Verse 5, it says, then Boaz said, oh, by the way, the day you buy the field from the land of Naomi, forgot to mention this, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. Then the Redeemer said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem it. So you know what he said? I don't think my wife would like that very much. I'm going to have to decline. Now I found out about the Moabite woman. Verse 11, it says, then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily. Catch that? Act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. And catch this. And the woman said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. So the blessing was really kind of in Ruth all along. I mean, it's what led to Naomi herself being redeemed, was the obedience and the loyalty and the faithfulness of Ruth. And Boaz was a redeemer, absolutely, but make no mistake, Ruth was the vehicle for it. She was kind of the redeemer for Naomi, and Boaz was the redeemer for Ruth. Verse 17, and the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David, and by extension, the father of Jesus, of the Messiah that we just talked about in Bible class, through this random Israelite family that happened to leave during a famine, that happened to be working in that field of this godly man. It's a beautiful story. But there's a lot more to it than that. The story began with tragedy and death, and famine and plight and struggles, and Ruth responded in her actions with loyalty and faithfulness despite her circumstances. And the end is Boaz showing loyalty and faithfulness to Ruth, and all is turned into a greater joy. It's got a flip-flop from chapter 1 to chapter 4. There's a total reversal. So I want you to consider Naomi. Naomi responded to tragedy and death with bitterness and hopelessness. That was her attitude. It was very bleak. She had the perception that God had slighted her, had wronged her, had taken up his hand against her. She felt that she was full before she left, and she felt that she was empty at that point in time, which she wasn't, right? Because she had Ruth. Ruth felt an unwavering love despite her tragedy and circumstances. Don't forget, she lost her husband. She was just as vulnerable as Naomi was. She wasn't in a better spot than Naomi, per se, aside from age. She was obedient to a point of open brazenness, risking reputation and all, because if you look at it in all the cultural things, it was pretty scandalous. In fact, she left when it was still dark before people could recognize faces. But it was out of obedience for Naomi. She acted in faith, and she responded to kindness, right? When Boaz showed her the kindness, she didn't say, well, finally someone cuts me a break. Finally, things go my way. She responds, what did I do to deserve this? What did I do to deserve this kindness? Whereas Naomi was, what did I do to deserve this tragedy and these circumstances? Two very, very different attitudes. Boaz, he behaved worthily, right? He was a worthy man. He was kind to everyone he encountered, not when he just thought he could get a beautiful bride, huh? Everyone he spoke to, he spoke with integrity and with a courteousness. He generously aided the plight of the unfortunate with Naomi and with Ruth, and he was faithful to the Torah. And you can see that with his actions and what he did and how he left the grain. He followed a lot of the old law, the law, Leviticus, Deuteronomy. He followed those, and we can see those steps he took. in this book. Even when it doesn't seem anyone would know, he still made the right decision, even behind closed doors. What's this? Anyone remember? Spaghetti noodle. This book records a sequence of events and decisions by the people in it. All of it ultimately leading to the redemption of mankind. We have lives, obviously. We have lives. Each day we wake up, we got routines, we have jobs, we make little decisions about what we watch on Netflix or on YouTube or what book we're reading or who we call on the phone. We all kind of have these patterns of behavior and these decisions. And what we do, and we make the mistake of, is we zoom in really, really close, and we miss the full picture of the full redemption picture for us as God's people. And we fall into this trap of mundane things. And perhaps we look around at our circumstances, and that influences how we act in a negative way. Because bad circumstances, I don't like that, so I'm going to make allowances for myself to behave unchristlike or poorly. And we get wrapped up, just zoomed in on just our little routines day to day, and we don't zoom out and think about what are my decisions leading to. Our lives are a sequence of constant decisions based on our circumstances. I'd like to ask you, did Naomi being bitter benefit herself in any way? And in the moment, I'd say no. Did Ruth deciding to cling to her mother-in-law benefit herself in that moment when she made that decision? No. It put her in an even more vulnerable position at that moment. Did Boaz's generosity to a foreign woman benefit himself in the moment? You see, we have the benefit of the end of the story. They didn't. Their guess was as good. Well, I guess we do have a better guess because we know the end, but they didn't have a clue. They didn't know how this story was going to end. They didn't know how God was going to bring it about to their redemption. But we can see kind of some not so good decisions and some really good decisions that they made despite their immediate circumstances because they had a higher goal in mind. And that influenced what they did, what they said, who they talked to, who they followed. And we need to have that perspective. Titus 2, verse 11 says, "For the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation for all people." Redemption, salvation for all of us. Training us to renounce ungodliness and worldly passions and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in this present age. She was living in the time of the Judges, which was a corrupt and evil time, and we kind of live not quite as bad as the Judges, but it's getting pretty bad. We live in a pretty bad and messed up society in this present age. But that can't influence our thinking. That can't influence our behaviors. Verse 13, waiting. Because we don't have the full scope, but our decisions should be based on that waiting. For our what? Our blessed hope, the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ, who gave himself for us to redeem us from all lawlessness and to purify for himself a people for his own possession who are zealous for good works. Ruth was proactive. She was faithful. She was loyal and unwavering in her commitment despite her own hardships and the reaction from the people around her. I mean, that had to be pretty discouraging, right? With Naomi kind of being a sad sack for a while. And again, I'm not blaming her. She lost a lot. But it didn't seem to influence Ruth's attitudes or behavior or words, did it? Even though, Naomi was kind of the covenant people of God, she kind of maybe should have been the example to this foreigner, but it didn't seem to waver Ruth. She just seemed like a really stubborn, like once she got something in her head, she's not getting it out. Those decisions combined with God's providence brought about her redemption and the redemption of those she cared about. And here's what I want to tell you. No matter what your circumstances are, and I mean this, there's terrible circumstances. We've all been through tragedy and death, and we all have our individual struggles and baggage and real hardships that we face on a day-to-day basis. Don't let that be the source of your decision-making, because that's a small picture, right? That's a small moment. That's a small season in the scope of eternity. And what God is saying and what we see, what Ruth shows us, is that our decisions in God's providence, they have a relationship, and we don't know exactly what that looks like. I mean, it says it just so happens that she was in that field. Maybe it was just random. Maybe it was providence. We don't know. But what we know is God rewarded and worked it out for those who made good decisions. We saw a fuller picture, who had a better hope. And that needs to be us. We have a better hope, and that's what we should base our decisions on, not our immediate circumstances. Do your circumstances decide you, or do you decide to do right despite your circumstances? My final question for you is, what are your daily decisions leading you to? Because those little decisions, day after day, what we watch, what we listen to, what we say, who we hang out with, that adds up. It's not like it's just, that day's gone, so it's never come to mind again, right? It builds to something. It's building a road. It's building a path. So pause this week and kind of examine your decisions. Like, what am I doing on a day-to-day basis? And it may not even be necessarily sinful, but maybe it's not leading you to a place you want to go. Maybe it's not leading you in a more Christ-like path. So I ask that all of us consider that this week. And if you want to make the decision to be redeemed, you can do that. Jesus has given his life freely for all of us. He has shed his blood, and we make contact with that blood in baptism. Please, if you want to become a Christian, if you're serious about it, if you want a relationship with God, if you want that hope that can get you through any circumstance, that can sustain you, no matter what happens on this earth, we ask that you come forward. Please come forward as we stand and sing.